But what separates successful entrepreneurs for everyone else is that most people leave their idea where it's nice and safe and warm and it can grow up to be successful in their head, which of course it's easy because you can create the perfect conditions for that. But as soon as you subject it to the real world, you're faced with the harsh reality that your idea sucks, and they all suck. There's no such thing as a good idea.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Perfectly Mentored. I'm your host, Jason Portnoy. My guest on this episode is Marc Randolph. And if you don't know who he is, he's the co-founder of a small little company called Netflix. And if you think that was just lightning in a bottle that he created a company called Netflix, a unicorn, he also created another business that he sold for over $1 billion with a capital B. He is a true entrepreneur, an amazing person with so much value to give. And that's why he mentors entrepreneurs right now on how to grow their business. Super smart guy. You're not going to want to miss this episode. Check it out. Marc, truly, truly a pleasure. I'm excited for this one. Welcome to the show.
Why, thank you. It's great to be with you.
So, look, I'm sure their listeners are a bit familiar with this company that you were part of building. I think it's called Netflix or something like that. I'm sure it will be big one day. Um, but in all seriousness, for the listeners who don't know about you and your entrepreneurial journey, why don't you give us some background?
Oh, well, let's see. We have 4 or 5 hours here.
I got as much time as you need.
No, I'll have to give you the quick back. I mean, the quick background is, yes, I was involved in the beginnings of Netflix, but that was really just one small part of my whole entrepreneurial journey. And Netflix was actually the 6th company that I started or had a hand in starting. So you might say I've been doing this for pretty much my whole life. And even after leaving Netflix, which now is more, 16, 17 years ago, I've continued to be an entrepreneur. I started another company after Netflix, and I still spend my days talking to other entrepreneurs, helping other entrepreneurs, investing in other entrepreneurs. I'm in deep.
What do you love about the coaching side of things?
Well, the funny thing is, people sometimes like to present it in these altruistic terms that, oh, I love helping, trying to do good. And listen, of course, some of that is true, but quite frankly, mentoring for me is almost like my methadone to my startup addiction. When I left Netflix, I was pretty sure I wasn't ready to go all in and start another company and do that whole 24/7 thing again. But I could no longer stop being an entrepreneur as I could stop breathing, meaning I could maybe last 4 minutes or something like that. But, and so after casting about for a long time about what's the right way to stay in without being all in, what I eventually landed on was mentoring people, but with a slightly different model where rather than just being an advisor, I, excuse me. So rather than being an advisor, I really wanted to be part of that process. I mean, I really wanted to understand the product. I wanted to understand the competition. I wanted to understand the team. I wanted to know the founder. I wanted to know the co-founders. I wanted to know what their personal situations were. What I was trying to do was get as close as I could to really being a part of that company. So I got that part of entrepreneurship, which is what compels me, which is that sitting around the table with the really smart people working on solving really interesting puzzles. And so even though, yes, I do my best to help, and I think I do help, there's a big piece of it that this is my chance to do a startup all over again, but I get to go home at 5 o'clock.
Without the implementation side.
Yes, exactly. I mean, listen, I'm in my early 60s now. I've seen a lot. I've been an entrepreneur for 4 decades. And so there are certain patterns that emerge that you can help people with. But what's been fascinating about the whole thing is that when I started, I expected that the problems that I'd be called on to help would be conventional ones, problems of go-to-market strategy, product development, fundraising, those aspects. But it turns out I spend more of my time on the social and cultural aspects of company building. That, at its heart, being an entrepreneur is a very lonely profession. That you're really trying to solve problems that have not been solved before. And sometimes there's no one you can talk to about it. You can't be fully forthcoming with your employees with some of the things you're struggling with. You can't sometimes be fully forthright with your investors or your board. You can go to your peers, but they're not informed enough to give a truly deep, be really helpful. And I realized that there was this space for me to be someone who did not have an ulterior motive behind my advice, that I could be fully aligned. And they were able to, and founders opened up, they had struggles with their coworkers, with their co-founder. They struggle with how to find the balance between work and family. I have some of the younger entrepreneurs, they're being tasked with building a board, and they've not only have they ever built a board or chaired a board meeting before, they've never been to a board meeting before. And so being able to be vulnerable enough to say, how do I even think about this, is what's so deeply fulfilling about what I get a chance to do, and what keeps it so interesting.
I have an agency. We've helped scale multiple businesses to 7-8 figures. And so now I run a coaching program.
To 70 figures?
No, 7-8 figures. 7-8 figures. 70
I was going to say, holy shit, that's a big company.
70 figures would be incredible. Yeah. One day, not there yet. But now I do coaching. I'm just curious because you do a lot of mentoring and a lot of coaching. Are you as surprised as I am about how much time? Like, I didn't plan for this, but like, I thought I would just teach people and it would be like, okay, here's business, here's marketing tactics or whatever. The amount of time I have to spend on mindset.
No, I was wondering where you're going with that. Absolutely. It's helping people set their internal expectations is a huge one. Being able to stay buoyant is a huge one. And certainly the cultural aspects, which is a version of mindset, huge. People tend to think if I just kind of build the right product, I am done. And it's so much more than that. I agree. You're getting people in the right frame of mind to are they doing this for the right reasons? That's a huge piece of the coaching I do. Setting expectations properly.
Do you have a hard time with getting, I mean, they want to listen to you, but in some minds, will an entrepreneur listen to you and be like, man, this guy was part of like building Netflix. I mean, I don't know what he knows about, like that's a unicorn company of what it became. Like, how relatable do you find that that's a struggle for you to become relatable to these guys that you're coaching?
I try really hard to do that. And but in some ways it's the reason I actually wrote the book to some degree, which was to help dispel this myth of the super founder, that somehow I had this magic power and I had this dream, and boom, out springs this fully formed billion-dollar, multi-hundred billion-dollar valuation company. Not at all. The reason I wanted to write the book, that will never work, was to show people that at the beginning, it was just like any startup, that it struggled, that it was just a handful of people who really didn't know what they were doing, that there was huge setbacks, that we were consistently having to evolve what our idea was and what direction we're going to go. I'm trying to make this relatable. And in fact, in some ways, that's a huge piece of the mentoring that I do, is to say, I am not smarter than you. I am not better prepared than you. I did not work harder than you do. Yes, there's a bunch of things I've learned how to do, which are the right approaches. But fundamentally, I sincerely believe that anybody can do the things that I've done. If you have some of the luck that I had, that I can't I can't necessarily deliver. But again, that gets back to mindset and setting expectations. If people say, Mark, help me start this company because I want to be rich and I want to be famous, I go, I can't do that. That's not what entrepreneurship's about. If that's the reason you're doing it,
Find a different
I,
route, considering 9 out of 10 businesses fail. So just find a different path to becoming rich and famous.
not only do 9 out of 10 fail, but 999,000 of them fail to become billion-dollar companies. It's akin to the person who says, I want to be an actor or an actress because I want to be rich and famous. Well, you're not. Very, 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 very few become rich and famous. And it's not because of talent. It's just because of this luck and being in the right place at the right time and being talented, and being judged talented. But if you say, I want to be an actor or an actress because I love creating characters and I love making a room full of people feel a certain way, well, then you're doing it for the right reason. But you can do that in Omaha and you can do that in Minnesota.
Do you truly believe you have to love what you do in order to be successful?
Put in a yes or no context, yes. So if you don't enjoy, well, I can't think of anything more tragic than someone who says, I want to be successful and I'm willing to be unhappy to do it. I don't understand what the point of that is in living your life like that. What are you going to get? You're going to pass. All of a sudden you can see ahead of you that little shining line called success and you step over it. And now I'm done being unhappy. Now I'll start being happy. What kind of crap is that? You're lucky if the steps you take toward being success also make you happy. But I can think of nothing more tragic than saying I'm willing to be unhappy for 40 years so I can be successful. Well, I don't get that.
I want to learn more about like what you're teaching these entrepreneurs, but I got to take a step back for a second. The early days of Netflix, what was that like? And I guess the coaching part here is, what lessons have you learned that you think now apply to other businesses, and maybe what you teach startups from the early days of Netflix?
I wrote that book for two reasons. One was the one I mentioned before, which is really to kind of dispel the myth of what starting companies like, to dissolve the epiphany myth that everything springs forth fully formed in this moment of divine inspiration, that companies struggle. But the other one is, yes, I've learned a few things in 40 years of being an entrepreneur, certain approaches, some tips, some tricks. And so it's a combination of those two things that I try and do. But at the beginning, Netflix was no different than any other company. It was just two guys brainstorming ideas. And mentoring lesson number one is get your idea out of your head. Everybody has ideas. Everyone who's taken a shower has had an idea. We can't help but think of ideas. But what separates successful entrepreneurs for everyone else is that most people leave their idea where it's nice and safe and warm and it can grow up to be successful in their head, which of course it's easy because you can create the perfect conditions for that. But as soon as you subject it to the real world, you're faced with the harsh reality that your idea sucks, and they all suck. There's no such thing as a good idea. So listen, lesson number one from the Netflix saga was that, Reed Hastings and I, my co-founder, were brainstorming all kinds of crazy ideas. I was pitching him, custom personalized shampoo and custom dog food and laser computer controlled milling machine shaped baseball bats and custom surfboards, all kinds of crazy crap. But the thing is, we were not then taking these ideas and going, oh, what a great idea. When we had an idea that we even thought had even a hint of promise, we were not like rushing to work on a business plan or put together our pitch deck. We said, how do you collide this idea with reality? And, in the Netflix case, when we had this idea that this new DVD technology may in fact allow us to do video rental by mail, we stopped thinking. We turned the car around and drove back into town and tried to mail a DVD to Reed's house, but there was no DVDs. So we go, fine, we'll buy a CD and mail it to his house. And we'll find out in just a matter of hours whether it's a good idea or a bad idea. And that is a fundamental tenet of entrepreneurship, is to stop thinking and start doing. Figure out ways to get your ideas out of your head where they're all good ideas, and in the real world where they're all bad ideas, and begin figuring out, why is it a bad idea? How can I migrate it? How can I mutate it to make it into a good idea? So there you go. There's lesson from the first minute of Netflix, which was allowing us to apply one of the fundamental principles of entrepreneurship that probably the single biggest thing I work with people on. It's easy for me to say, stop thinking and start doing. It's easy for me to put on my little Instagram quote tile, figure out a way to collide your idea with reality quickly and cheaply and easily. What's hard is how. How do I take this idea, which to me has 75 different moving parts? How do I quickly and cheaply and easily? And I go, that's the clever part. And quite frankly, that's a lot of the mentoring. And it's a lot of the mentoring at scale that I do. It's what the podcast is all about. It's when I spend, 30 to 40 minutes with an entrepreneur, not just delivering pithy sound nuggets, but saying, let's really walk through how to approach this. How do you take this idea you have and break it down and figure out a way to quickly and easily, cheaply collide it with reality?
So I got you here. So I got to ask, if there's a person listening right now who's like, I have an idea, what's the audit you do? Then what's that walkthrough you do in order to start executing, in order to start figuring out whether this idea is really something that could build a business around?
So the fundamental premise is recognizing that every idea has multiple components to it, and that not all of the components are novel. Usually one component is novel. Or usually it's not even components of it. It's the thing that I don't really understand. That's the uncertainty, is how customers might react to something. And so the way to make things quick, cheap, and easy to try is to isolate that single variable and just test that. And do we have a few minutes? I'll give you an example.
Yeah, of course, please.
So this is an entrepreneur that I worked with probably 3 or 4 years ago. She was a university student. She was still in college. And as I do a lot of work with college age entrepreneurs, and she came to me, here's this great idea I have. It's going to be peer-to-peer clothing sharing. I have all these clothes in my closet I don't wear. I know friends who have clothes they don't wear. Wouldn't it be great if there was this app and everyone could go on and see everyone else's clothes and they get shipped back and forth and blah, 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 blah. And she's going, I go, okay, cool. What do you want to talk about? And she goes, well, should I quit school? How am I going to raise several $million and I'm only a college student? How do I find a technical co-founder to help me build? And I'm going, whoa, slow down. Let's break this apart. And let's figure out what the fundamental premise is. And let's figure out how to validate that pretty quickly. I go, do you have a piece of paper? She goes, yeah, I have a piece of paper. I'm a college student. I go, okay, great. Do you have a Sharpie? You have a magic marker? She goes, yes. I go, write on the piece of paper, do you want to borrow my clothes, comma, knock, exclamation point. And tape that to your dorm room door this afternoon. Because we're going to find out quite immediately whether the first fundamental premise of your idea is real. Does anyone care? Now you're going to learn 1 or 2 things. No one's going to knock for 2 or 3 days. Now you've learned something very important about your idea. But let's be optimistic. Let's say people start knocking. Fantastic. You've learned something. Let's now see what happens next. You're going to see, how do you have problems? Do you have problems with fit? Do you have problems with taste and style? Now, let's say people do love what you have and they begin borrowing it. Great. You're going to learn something else. You're going to learn how you feel as the product owner, how it feels when they come back stained or torn. You're going to learn how much it costs to get everything dry cleaned. You're going to begin doing this in a totally non-repeatable, non-scalable way using 3x5 cards and a yellow pad, and you're going to be going crazy. But you're going to learn fundamentally if your idea is a really good one or not by actually doing it. You're not using technology because, listen, are we wondering whether it's possible to build an app? No, it's possible to build an app. Are you wondering whether it's possible that someone's going to trust you to give you their credit card? No, that's been proven many times before. You're wondering whether this fundamentally people are going to really want to borrow other people's clothes. And you can learn that with a piece of paper and a Sharpie, and you're willing to hustle.
So do you think VCs kind of ruined what true entrepreneurship really is? Like a lot of people now think that they could become an entrepreneur because it's a cool thing to do. They have an idea, they'll go raise $700 million and they'll become rich like that and do it that way.
So the first question was, do I think
Do you think
VCs
VCs ruined like
ruined?
ruin true
No,
entrepreneurship?
no, not at all. I mean, they've hugely enabled true entrepreneurship because they've eliminated one of the big barriers. Is that, here's the important phrase: once you've found something that actually does work, they make the rest of it possible. They're willing to take those risks bet on you and give you the resources to go after it. It is not their job to fund all kinds of bullshit. It's a very reasonable requirement to say, I want you to demonstrate that this thing you say is a good idea actually is a good idea. And listen, when Reed and I started Netflix, the tools weren't there. If you wanted to do an e-commerce website, there was not Shopify. You had to write. You had to code an e-commerce website server. If you wanted to host it, you did not have Amazon Web Services to put an instance in the cloud in 10 minutes for $29.95. You had to buy all the servers. You had to stick them in a closet. You had to cool it. You had to wire it. You wanted security. You had to write your own security. You wanted to take payments. You had to build your own portals to the bank. Now, all that stuff is out of your hands. There's no excuse for you taking an idea. I mean, now we're talking tech, of course, but it applies any place. There's no excuse for not saying the only thing, the distance between inspiration and execution is hours. For Reed and I, it was 6 months and $1 million. But because of that, back then, this is 23 years ago, you did have to go in with a lot of that hand waving and imagine, if you will, and here's the total addressable market. And here's the experience that Reed and I both have had doing this before to get them to write the checks for $2 million to say, take a shot at it. That has gone away because now it is so easy to quickly, cheaply, and easily validate your idea that it's very reasonable for a VC to say, I don't want to hear the imagine, if you will. I want to say, look at what I've found out. The young woman I mentioned, who was doing the peer-to-peer clothing sharing, 6 months goes by and she's able to sit down with a funder and say, I know what my retention rate is. I know what my lifetime values are. I know what my retention rate is. I know what my churn is. I know what my acquisition cost is. I'm doing this all going crazy, doing it all manually, but I've learned the fundamentals of the business. And so now I'm asking you to fund me taking this to the next level. There's still a lot to learn, but I know my fundamental premise is sound. And having this entirely robust VC infrastructure, especially now that there's entire firms that specialize in seed and A, is, I think, a great development. It's just one more thing. It's the exact same thing as Amazon has said, I can start a company without having to figure out how to have a robust, scalable architecture for serving my web pages. Now the venture market has demonstrated, if you have an idea, there's a repeatable, scalable way to find money.
So I'm curious to hear in your mind, what makes the perfect pitch, if there is such thing?
Absolutely, there's not a perfect pitch, but there's certain. And first of all, what do I know? Okay, I'm not a venture investor.
No, but you do mentor people on how to come up with their offers and create their offers and how to present it.
True. And for me, the most effective way to raise money is to demonstrate that your idea is a good one before you go in the door. And the pitch should reflect that. It should say, here is what I found out, and that I truly understand what is happening. I understand what my risks are. I understand what I'm going to use this money to demonstrate. And then after I've proven that, what I'm going to need to go back and raise money to prove next. It's very, very related to what you want to do once you actually have a company. When you're working with your investors, your board, is demonstrate not that you're necessarily successful, because no one in this business is investing because it's a guarantee of you being successful. What they want demonstrated is that you have your hands firmly on the wheel. I got this is what you want to communicate from the minute you walk in the door. I understand. I understand who my customer is. I understand what problem I'm solving for them. I understand who the competitors are. Here is what I've learned. This is a seed stage pitch. Here's what I've learned on my own about the metrics of my business. I understand what the key metrics are. This is the key metric, and here's what it's doing. Wow. Someone who can walk in and do that and show these people, I got this, is very, very compelling, as opposed to imagine how the total addressable market is 18 gazillion. And all they need, this is the best line, all we need is 1%. Yeah, good luck.
Are you shocked by how many business owners don't know their numbers?
Oh my God, absolutely. It's scary. And not just don't know their numbers, don't know the right numbers. Don't know that, I mean, this is looking at, hey, let's wind back a little bit. You were saying, what are the lessons you learn from Netflix or other companies that are the lessons you teach, which is that you have got to understand the true drivers of your business. And that fundamentally, there's usually only 2 or 3. There's 100 things on fire. There's 100 things you could measure. There's 2 or 3 that if you get those right and focus on those to the obsession, to the exclusion of everything else, they can lift the whole business. And
which are?
They're different for every company.
Okay.
That's the trick, which is and they're not usually the ones that they're screaming the loudest. They may not be the most obvious, but that's the trick. And that only comes from making sure you really have dug in deep and understand. But a lot of times people will give me false numbers. They'll be saying, oh God, the best one was, I got this one about a week or 2 ago. We saw a 10,000% growth quarter over quarter. And I go, so basically that means, what does that mean? I can't even do the math. You had one person, maybe one customer last quarter, and you have what, 10,000 now? Is that, or do you have 1,000 and now you have 10 million now? I mean, and what is this? And now I'm looking at your Q3 forecast. That means you're going to drop from 10,000% down to 30% growth next. In other words, don't bullshit me. Don't try. Show me you have your hands in the wheel. Listen, the number's going to be small at the beginning. Of course they are. But let's see you understand the future path of what's going to happen. What's really important here? And okay, what are the important numbers? It depends on the business hugely. But for web businesses, for example, most businesses, what you're looking for is engagement. In other words, will the dogs eat the dog food? I don't care how good your advertising is if the dogs won't eat the dog food. So I want to evidence these dogs love the dog food. They're coming back. Engagement is going up. I don't care how quickly you acquire customers if they don't stick around. Anyway.
Love it.
Got me going here.
No, it's great. It's great. I have a lot of more questions that I'm going to go into, but one of the biggest questions that I got when I asked, what would you ask Mark if you had a chance to sit with him? Obviously, the biggest things come back to like the Blockbuster story, and I selfishly want to ask some questions about there as well. But before that, even, I think a lot of people know about Blockbuster and that big thing not to buy, and I promise I want to talk about that. But something I didn't know until recently is that Jeff Bezos actually made an offer, and that you guys said no. Can you walk me through that? Because that's, I mean,
sure. So I have to give some context first, which is that you've heard me say that no such thing as a good idea. And in fact, when we were pitching the idea for Netflix, for investment, for employees, everyone said the same thing, which is they all said that will never work. Which is why the book is called That Will Never Work, which is why the podcast is called That Will Never Work. It's like a big reminder to me that nobody knows anything. But crazily enough, they all turned out to be right. That Netflix, of course, as was originally started and launched, didn't work, but that's fine. But the thing is, this is us going ahead anyway and saying, the only way to really find out whether this is going to work or not is to try it. And we put a huge amount of effort into trying it. It took us 6 months to build this simple e-commerce website, to put in place the payment, be able to accept payments, to be able to have serve web pages. We had to find a copy of every single DVD available, because at the beginning, as you know, but maybe not everyone else does, Netflix originally was not streaming. We were video rental by mail. If you wanted a movie, you didn't stream it, we mailed it to you on a DVD. So we needed a copy of every single movie available on DVD. We needed partnerships with all the major consumer electronics companies that were making DVD players that we had coupons in their boxes. And lo and behold, we launched. We had done all these amazing things. We had shown we could do it. And about 3 or 4 months in, we did get the call from Jeff Bezos. And at the time, also, just to give you a sense of how long ago this was that at the time, Amazon only sold books, if you can imagine such a thing. But Jeff Bezos had made no secret of the fact that he wanted to be the everything store. And it was pretty sure that the next 2 steps toward everything was going to be music and movies. So when he called us, it was pretty clear that we were perhaps his way to accelerate to the movies piece. And Reed and I flew up to Seattle, and it was in some ways this tremendous validation, because Jeff Bezos and Amazon, they were the pioneers of e-commerce. I mean, he had an IPO already. He was like the god. And here was an idea that everyone said that'll never work. But Jeff Bezos saw something in us. So it was tremendously this validation. But, we had this conversation. It was pretty obvious how this partnership might go down. They might buy the company to accelerate the entrance into video. And on the way out, the CFO, as they were showing out, she was kind of hinting at, if we made an offer, it would probably be in this range, which we took to be about maybe $15 million. And that would have been pretty good return. I owned about 40% of the company at that point, and that's $6 million for less than a year's work is pretty good. But Reed and I, on the way back, flying back, we're going, we've solved all the big problems, or so we thought. We're not quite ready to give up on this one yet. We're not ready to hand someone else the keys and let them drive. And so rather than really being an acquisition discussion, this was more of, I'd call it a commitment ceremony for Reed and I, where we said, if we want out, we can get out, or we can look each other in the eye and say, are we ready to do this? Let's do this.
I got to ask about this, because we all hear about the companies who were offered money to sell and they all said no. And then they became the big companies, and good thing they didn't sell. But I feel we don't hear enough about, and probably which happens, I'd guess, more often than the narrative I just gave, is that, companies offered money, they don't sell, and then they don't go on to become a success, or they fail. So what decisions, how do you then audit what goes on and be like, should we sell? Should we not sell? Every company, is it just like welcome to entrepreneurship? It's like going to the casino. Sometimes you got to roll the dice and play the game.
It's much smarter than that. Or if it's in the casino, it's more poker. It's looking at the strength of your hand. It's getting a judgment about what hand everyone else has. My wife worked on Wall Street for a long time, has an expression, and she goes like, what's it? Bulls make money and bears make money, but pigs get slaughtered. And it's being realistic. So yes, you have to have this extremely high risk threshold to say, I'm willing to push my chips back into the center of the table, again, to use your gambling analogy, rather than taking my modest winnings and go home. And certainly Netflix has done that plenty of times, where we've said it is better to go for long odds for the big success than to take a small win and just milk that to death, even though it's never going to go anywhere. But listen, as a founder, your responsibility isn't just to yourself, it's to your stakeholders, it's to your employees, to some degree, it's to your customers, to do the right thing. And perfect example is the company I was involved with starting after Netflix called Looker Data. We grew that company to a market capitalization nearly 10 times what Netflix was when it went public, but eventually began to saw the shape of the market that we were playing in and realized that the odds of us continuing to grow as an independent company were challenging, because each time you succeed, you move into a bigger space. You have to begin solving a broader set of problems for a broader set of customers. You're up against a bigger set of competitors who are usually a lot stronger than the previous set. And at some point you say, this is not the right time. And if you're intelligent, in our case, I'll give myself a little bit of credit, you say, where is the real value for this product? Is it as a standalone company? Or is the real value for this product as part of a suite of offerings from a bigger company? And in the case of Looker, we decided it was better off as part of a larger company, and we sold to Google and did very well. And that was a perfectly fine outcome. So I've seen it, and I've also seen companies that held on to the bitter end, and you're right, go down, but I don't fault them for that. Like you said, 9 out of 10 built businesses fail.
I think there's a lot of information around what happened with Blockbuster. I know the story is very public. I know you and Reed have both publicly spoken about it. What's the biggest misconception or biggest myth or I guess twisted story that has come out of there that's just not true about that Blockbuster deal?
I alluded earlier to the fact that I try and dispel the epiphany myth as often as I can, which is the shorthand versions of where companies came from. You know, the two guys who behind in the rent and put down and have an idea for putting down a blow up air mattress in a room, and then boom, Airbnb is there. Travis can't get a cab on New Year's Eve, and boom, there's the idea for Uber. Or there's a late fee in a movie, and boom, there's Netflix. And the reason those things spring up is that most people don't want the long story. Their eyes glaze over. And so you quickly go, what's a shorthand, which is emotionally true? And listen, the Blockbuster thing is true. There's a longer story, and I've told that longer story quite a few times. But the shorthand version is, if only Blockbuster had bought Netflix, their problems would have been solved. In other words, the singular moment of error which brought them down. And that, of course, is ridiculous. The executives at Blockbuster are not stupid. They made some mistakes, sure, but there was a tremendous number of forces that were allied against them, of which just one of them was Netflix. And that's the myth, which is that Netflix single-handedly took down Blockbuster because of a spurned acquisition offer.
So do you think
there's a lot of things that were conspiring against the video rental bricks and mortar model, way beyond just us?
So my follow-up question to that is, and you kind of answered part of it, was, do you think if they did buy Netflix, if you guys sold to Blockbuster, they'd still be around today? Meaning not video rental stores, because probably not, but do you think they would have done the innovative things that Netflix has done over the course of the years?
I doubt it. And I doubt it because the one thing that they did wrong is what most large, dominant, market-leading companies do, which is they, by their very nature, want to protect their core businesses and do so at almost any cost. And one of the reasons that they allowed Netflix to, when they said no, continue to get stronger and stronger, is they never had the courage to put their A team on the game. At every juncture, they would say, let's see, we have $6 billion coming out of our bricks and mortar operation. And let's see if this team gets video rental by mail right, meaning if their own independent group, it could be what, 10 million? Why on earth we put our best engineers and our best executives on that? And there's never the point at which they decide to do so. And so had they bought Netflix, my guess is they would have starved it of resources. They would never have gotten to the point where we said, we need to do this to survive, and it's going to hurt your core business. In other words, to get an incremental $10 million in video rental by mail, you're going to probably lose $1 billion out of your core business.
So who do you think, if Netflix didn't exist, like you sold it, and Blockbuster ran it to the ground, who would be the first in your mind to come up with what we see as Netflix today?
I really don't know. I mean,
I would imagine you would have thought Amazon because of how Jeff saw the potential early on.
Yes, but not of he would never have done video rental by mail. He would have seen that was ridiculously complex, completely did not fit into his model, which is what I'm amazingly good at, is moving physical goods in one direction. It would have been seen unnecessarily complex. And I think maybe much later, as he has entered video rental, he would have. But listen, who knows? I'm going to guess it was probably been Hulu. It would have been a consortium of the television networks saying we need to fund something to begin understanding the next generation of delivery. People would have seen what was happening with what happened with Napster and say, how do you do digital? Believe me, a lot of companies did streaming before Netflix. There was many efforts. So this was not a novel idea. The advantage that Netflix had, which was probably really hard for anyone to anticipate, was that we invented a business model which we were able to run for 9 years, which I'll give us some credit for. It was positioned in a way that set us up to jump when video rental was possible, when video streaming was possible to do. We already had a deep understanding of our customers' tastes, of how to do personalization. And our customers thought about us as someone who helped them find great things to watch. So it was a very natural evolution, whereas everyone else had to start from scratch.
You've talked a lot about the lessons in your book and on the podcast that you've learned from your time there. But what was the biggest mindset change for you from your years at Netflix?
Probably what got cemented into me was the idea that it was not important to have a good idea. That the thing that was important was building a culture, building a system, building a process for trying lots of bad ideas. And that has so many repercussions when you figure out how to do that. I mean, besides dramatically increasing the number of things you can try, it democratizes decision-making because you never know. Once you've lowered the barrier to trying something, you can try anyone's idea. And so if you stop being in this mode of the only person who decides what to do is the person who gets paid the most or is the most senior title, and you begin to recognize that a great idea can come from any place. I mean, it has lots and lots of repercussions. I think that's what we learned by seeing how effective it was and continually pushing the boundaries of how quick and cheap and crappy we could make our tests.
And what has been the biggest eye-opening moment or experience for you coaching young entrepreneurs now?
There's no, I'm stuck. There's no singular light bulb moment. I learned so much all the time from watching how people move forward. I'm always impressed sometimes by people's perseverance always impresses me and surprises me sometimes. I worked with one person. Well, and boy, they keep hanging on and keep on rallying and coming back. And I'm going, wow, this is a really, really, really impressive. And it's a big surprise. Not that I don't know that it's important, not that I don't know it's a characteristic, but wow, when you see, again, it's such a classic thing that's easy to say, oh, persistence is the key ingredient. But God, that is just so hard to be disappointed for weeks and weeks and months and months. And just when you think you have something, it gets snatched away from you, but you rally back and try something else. God, that's just so surprising in such a wonderful way every time I see it happen.
One of the things you talk a lot about in leadership is the importance of being a great communicator. So, I mean, I know a lot of people who find public speaking, writing, something tremendously hard to do. So I'd love to know from you, what are some of your tips on how the listeners could get better at becoming better communicators, better writers, or whatever it takes to be better communicators in order to grow their business?
So I can answer it two ways. So I'll have to answer the first one first, which is that leadership is situational, that there is not one size fits all. And I can't emphasize that enough. Leadership has to be genuine. It has to come from who you are, that we can't all be Steve Ballmer and be up on a stage, frothing with enthusiasm and excitement. Just, it's not me and it's not most people, but it works for him. And it's also situational, not just to the person, it's situational to the situation. That a lot of times you can lead from behind. You can be deeply collaborative. You can be one of those leaders for whom the people say, wow, look at what we accomplished. And you can just sit there in the back smiling. But listen, sometimes when shit hits the fan, there's not time for that. You do have to change quickly your style into, okay, do this, do that, do this. And being a good leader is recognizing when it's appropriate for various styles. But for communication does play a big role in any of these things. People can't do what they should do without understanding the context for their actions. They do need to have all the information to make good decisions. And many times that has to come from you. And so all I can really say is, yeah, sure, it helps to learn, but more important thing is to practice and to practice small scale. You do not need to be the person who says, oh my gosh, the only way to do this is to get up in front of 1,000 people and give a keynote speech for the sales kickoff meeting. When you speak to 5 people, prepare for it the way you might prepare for a bigger presentation. What are your key points? What's the order you're going to do them in? And little by little, you can't help but get better at it. I mean, all things, in my opinion, come from repetition and practice. And the trick is to start at the beginning. I mean, here's the analogy. It's the same thing you do if you were learning a language. Sure, you can read the books, you can learn the vocabulary, you can study, but the only way you really learn to become fluent in the language is by actually going and speaking to people. And what that requires, and here's the big one, is you got to be willing to sound like you're in 4th grade for a long time. So because of that, you do not say, okay, I've just finished my French lessons. I'm going to now get a job as a simultaneous translator at the United Nations. I'm going to start by having the courage up to go in and order a cup of coffee and realizing that they might laugh at me and they're going to smirk. Too bad. And you do that. I remember this huge pride I had. I lived in France for a long time. Then I lived in Italy. But when I lived in France, the pride I had when I ordered a pizza over the phone to be delivered to my apartment. I mean, wow, that felt better than almost anything because I had worked my way up to the ability to do an interactive conversation on the telephone with somebody, even though it was a ritualized conversation where, they're going to ask me the address. They're going to ask what I want. I mean, but it's the same thing with anything. Practice, practice, practice.
I'll wrap up with this. I think you're coaching a lot of entrepreneurs. There's this myth of the 24/7 work hustle. I know for me, not only I didn't I don't think I chose entrepreneurship. I think I'm unemployable. I don't think I could work for anyone. I don't think I could work for anyone else. But one of the most important things for me is that I am um, there for my family, that I have this job to be with my family, that I'm there and present for my kids. The 24/7 work hustle to me is just such a turn off. I would not be an entrepreneur if I thought that was the case. But do you find that's one of the things that you have to coach, I guess, a lot of the entrepreneurs you deal with
A-
on?
Absolutely, all the time. It's such a big part of culture. Uh, it's this goes back to one of the very, very first things we talked about today, which was, do you have to be, I'm not sure how you phrased it, do you have to be unhappy to be successful or something like that? Do you have to love what you do in order to be successful? And of course you don't have to be, but why would you want to be unhappy to be successful? And what is success? In my opinion, it's this balance. You don't want to work all the time. I love working. I mean, I and a gazillion other people, especially in Silicon Valley, have gotten the resources. They don't have to work. But why would you stop doing something you love doing? But I also, like you, I love my family. I love spending time with my kids. I love spending time with my wife. I love outdoor stuff. I love mountain biking. I love backcountry skiing. I love climbing. I love surfing. So I'm not going to give up on those other things just to make the business successful. And more importantly, and here's where the coaching comes in, I don't think you need to. I wrote a blog post a few months ago on my website at markrandolph.com that about why I never run for airplanes. And I mentioned this a minute ago that I lived in France and I was running marketing for a big software company. And I was every 4 days a week traveling to one of our offices elsewhere in Europe and catching planes all the time. And so believe me, plenty of times I'm hustling through the airport with my briefcase and dodging people. And then this revelation that it almost never made the difference. Either you get to the gate and you can see the plane off in the distance, hustle didn't make a difference because you're too late, or you make it to the gate and the doors are wide open and, oh, we're 20 minutes late, come in and sit down, and you sit there and marinate in your sweat for half an hour. And it didn't make a difference 1% of the time. So I go, what's the point of hustling? And here's the analogy, is that it's the same thing in business, is that all those times you go, I'm up at 4 o'clock in the morning, going over, changing the fonts on this presentation. No, it didn't make a difference. You lost the deal 3 weeks ago. You didn't lose the deal because you had the wrong font in the presentation. You begin to realize that you don't need to get everything perfect. It's back to that key strategy of figuring out what are the 2 or 3 things. If you get them right, it lifts all the boats. But that fundamentally, if you define success as, doing what you're good at and doing what you enjoy and having time in your life for the other things, ultimately that's way, way more important.
I love that. Final question for you. How important is market domination? And what I mean by that is is to build a brand, to become the authority in your space. If you're an entrepreneur, how important is it to have that mindset?
Oh, completely unimportant, in my opinion.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I mean, why? It just seems like a ridiculously unrealistic hurdle to to, to try and do it. But again, it comes from the fact that I think people are motivated by the wrong things. I think the reason that you should want to be an entrepreneur, want to have your own business, is not because you're going to make a gazillion dollars at it.
So let me rephrase. How important is the success of a business around building a brand behind it?
Oh, entirely depends on the business. So, I mean, I did this. I did some work a while ago for Mars Pet Care. Mars, the big brand, and I go, Mars Pet Care. I didn't even know Mars did pet care. And then they begin rattling off their brands, and I go, oh my God, those are huge. So Mars Pet Care did not build a brand around Mars Pet Care. So for them, they became hugely dominant in the space by saying, we're going to let the products, in their case, the sub-brands, speak for themselves. In other cases, yes, the brand becomes critical. I think what you do have to do is have a very, very clear understanding of what role you play in someone's life, that you've clearly defined that. And if that's what's considered brand, then I would agree with you. You better have a good focus on what your purpose is as a company, what role you play specifically in your customers' lives, what they turn to you for, and whether that becomes an outwardly facing brand or whether it's an inwardly facing clear idea of what your center is. That's what's important.
Mark, thank you so much for doing this. For the listeners who want to get in touch with you, I know you threw one plug in a little too early. I was going to give you the whole platform to do it now, but
I blow my chance. I blew my shot. Oh no!
Yeah, we're wrapping up here. No, for the listeners who want to get in touch with you, they want to learn more, or they want to be one of the lucky people to get mentored and coached by you. How can they find you?
So, I mentioned the book, which is a great place not only to kind of learn some of these untold stories about Netflix, but really to get the benefit of all I've kind of learned in my 40 years as an entrepreneur. It's called That Will Never Work. I do a podcast, which is also called That Will Never Work, which these are half-hour sessions not with famous entrepreneurs, not with successful people, but with people who are struggling just like I used to, where I'm really trying to say, how do we do this? How do we work through these problems? I do take people to be mentored on the show. And on my website at marcrandolph.com, you'll find a way to apply to be on the show. I do mentoring live every Tuesday at 5 p.m. on Clubhouse. And I pick people from the audience, another way to get my ear. And I occasionally do take people and work with them long term, but I just set expectations. It's a long dating process before I find out who I want to work with. But again, marcrandolph.com is the place for all things Marc Randolph, whether you have the patience for a 300-page book, a half-hour podcast, or want it all served up in, how many characters is a tweet now? 250, something like that. So you get it in all sizes in between, but it's my effort to do what I call mentoring at scale. And I'm still trying to figure that out. So,
well, thank you for doing what you're doing, and thank you for coming on this podcast and perfectly mentoring this audience. So, really appreciate you. Thank you, Mark.
Good luck to everybody, and thank you as well.
Hey, everyone! Thank you so much for watching this video. If you want, check out our most recent video over here, and this one is the one YouTube thinks you'll like. But if you really enjoyed watching, please do me a favor, like and subscribe over here. Thank you so much.